Logo up there.
Good afternoon, everybody. The future of work is a topic du jour these days, but our guest today has been thinking about it longer than most of us, longer than we've been living in a post-pandemic tinged world. We'll talk big picture. We'll get personal too. Our guest today is going to rock our thinking. And before I introduce him, let me just say welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast live. And so if you're with us live, please ask your questions and we'll answer them if we feel like we want to. No, seriously, if you've got questions, we'll answer them. And if you're not live, you could be live for future episodes because there's about 2 months between when we're having this live and when those of you that are on the podcast are hearing it in the normal sort of way. So if you want to join us for future episodes, you can do that by joining us in our Facebook or LinkedIn groups. Simple way to find those, go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to do that and get a head start on thinking about the future. Let me introduce you to our guest today. His name is Jonas Altman. He is the author of Shapers, Reinvent the Way You Work and Change the Future. He is a speaker, writer, entrepreneur on a mission to make the world of work more human. As the founder of the award-winning design practice Social Fabric, he creates learning experiences to elevate and grow leaders at the world's boldest organizations. We'll come back to that before we're done. But first of all, Jonas, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you so much for having me here. And I'm excited to get into this, Kevin.
Yeah, so am I. Really, really great. So first thing, you've got an interesting sort of journey that led you to here. And you even told me a little bit about why you wrote the book, but before we went live. But just tell us a little bit about the path that got you to here, this thing called Social Fabric, but just like, how did you end up on a podcast with me
right
in October of 2020?
No idea. Absolutely no idea. I was just walking down the street and you grabbed me and you're like, get in here. There's this thing in my head. It actually, as you hit live, is I knew I wanted to be something when I grew up, and I'm glad I wasn't specific. I think I've become better off for it. And I know that I suffer from delusion when I say that, because I'm able to now make sense of what is a jungle gym: philosophy, marketing, design, education, the music industry, the fashion industry, slanging beer, working in a law firm, working at a university, working in a think tank. And all of those experiences, I never found that I fit. I always found that I was subordinating parts of myself to fit in and to conform. And there's parts of me that didn't have utility. And so in 2012, I pivoted and have my third career, which is very much in your vein. I don't work for anybody, and I get to do what I want, and I get to use my idiosyncrasies as my currency. So that shows up mostly as teaching, as coaching, and writing is just a passion that at some point became a practice, which then became a book.
Okay, so while we're there, I mean, everyone who's paying attention probably knows he's wanting to talk about a book a little bit, and we're going to, of course, along the way, but it's got an interesting title. By the way, when I just typed in the word Shapers into Amazon before I put it in the book category, like, it's a whole nother world. But so I'll recommend anyone does that later if they so choose. I mean, it's not like it's, X-rated or anything, but it's not about books.
It's risque. It's risque.
It was not about books, right? So there you go. So my question is, how did you sort of come up with the title, and what's the big idea of the book?
Sure. Let's start with the title and then get to the big idea. There was a lot of resistance. So I had things like Alvin Toffler's third wave and, words like change and literally on the tin in the name for so long. But I never really felt that I had landed on it. And then when I wrote the book proposal, I had two customer segments or two readers: shapers and shifters. Shapers are ones who have a lot of autonomy and a high degree of agency, either entrepreneurs or leaders in an organization that have freedom, or a startup, and are shaping the future of work. Like basically the book will validate what they're already doing. And shifters who are in a transition, are irritated or frustrated. And the publisher said, Shapers is the name. And I said, hell no. And they said, yes, it is. And then I said, hell no. And then finally an editor said, it is, and you better deal with it. The idea is that if
you sign a contract, and at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. The core idea, and it's really important to stress this in a world where potentially there'll be 300 million unemployed, 1 out of every 4 on unemployment insurance in America. If you are in a position to entertain finding or discovering meaning and getting joy from your work, it's a duty to do so. And what happens is you, in effect, change, and it has a ripple effect. Your colleagues, your family, your friends, your engagement in civic activities, your ability to recycle, your commute, all shift. And I wrote that prior to COVID, and I still think it's true. We can see, even though some things are using Photoshop, we can see clean air, and we can see deers crossing the street in London, and so forth. So that's the thesis. And once you start to entertain that, I believe that what happens is you get energized by what you do. I can tell you are. You get to express yourself every day and don't have to stuff your emotions. And you start to feel and potentially do something that's greater than yourself.
So as you say all that, you sort of get at my next question a bit. You've maybe in part started to answer my next question a little. And so you say that work isn't working for most people. And you've kind of gotten at that, but I'd like you to dive into that more deeply, because it's for everyone who's watching now, listening later, they're wearing at least 2 hats. They're wearing the leader hat, most likely. And they're also, if they're leading, they're also a team member, right? Whether that's if it's like me, where it's your organization, you're on the team you lead. But for most people, they're on 2 teams, the one they lead and the one of their peers. So when we ask that question about why is work not working, it's worth thinking about from both of those perspectives, right? So I want all of you to be listening to the answer, and Jonas, you can certainly talk to it in both ways if you want. But why is it that work, from your perspective, isn't really working?
Fundamentally at the root is something that Barry Schwartz, who teaches at Berkeley, has been sort of championing for years. Adam Smith created a story that we would work for carrots and be motivated strictly by pay, and that we're lazy. And that myth became true. And the industrial model and the way organizations are structured typically are in a machine age mentality of units, productivity, efficiency, replication. And in the 50s, in the Mad Men era with advertising, and certainly into the 70s with the microchip, and certainly now with TikTok and Instagram, it's the cat's out of the bag. It's like that world's done. So the system needs an upgrade. But in order for the system to be upgraded, the people who are within it and operate within it and are living and breathing also need a new frame, a new reference, a new attitude. And that's where the 21st century leader could enter in, who's no longer ruling as if people are lazy and incompetent, but people are adults. And if you give them agency, they will do their best work. And then we'll see higher engagement, higher collaboration, better productivity. And then I think, to your point around teams, is, there's a lot of people who are great individual contributors and not necessarily great leaders. And there is some Gallup research and other research that shows that very few leaders have what it takes to be effective. And so the rationale or the reasoning could be, let's get rid of the leaders and move to self-management and have no more bosses or less hierarchy, or acknowledge that leadership can be more dynamic and that the power doesn't have to be so concentrated, and we can have emergent leaders and move away from positional authority and have it much more distributed, where a team lead could be like, I know data, big data, let me lead on this project, even though the boss is the boss and the ego is left at the door. So I think you're right. There's like rotating, and we are in effect team of teams. Everyone is playing on multiple teams, like a basketball, NBA thing. And you're like going to Europe to play in the All-Stars, and then you're coming back, and then you're getting traded. And the permanence of a team is sort of leaving, and the acknowledgement that it's much more fluid and adaptive has become the new norm.
So if I'm a leader and at any level in an organization, and I'm listening to you and I'm getting excited, and I say, he's got the picture that he's saying it in a way that I haven't been able to say it, but I'm with him. What's the path? Like, how do we institute or move in that direction?
That's a great question. I think the first thing that helps, and it happens with, when you're a kid and you're looking at what sports to play, is modeling the behavior. So some people say, well, I'm managing up, so it's hard to model the behavior because the behavior that I'm receiving, or the signals, are fear-based, ego-based, ruling with an iron fist or thumb. One of those expressions, thumb. Yeah. So I think if you have models of people who have, the CEO of Google, there's a great company called NextJump, Hair in China, the refrigerator company, Semco, Ricardo Semler. They all have, they're not necessarily well known, but they all are leaders that have really understood that their biggest asset is their people. And my question, or a question I can ask myself every day, is how can I help you do your best work? How can I enable you to trade on your creativity, your cognitive abilities, your ability to do great work? And, even though it sounds very simple, when you start approaching it that way, it's no longer a Mr. Know-it-all or Mrs. Know-it-all, and you're now becoming a Mrs. or Mr. Learn-it-all. And you see these companies that are deliberately developmental, that are really concerned with personal and professional development, with mental health, with diversity and inclusion as a good business strategy, and actually well-being in tandem with financial performance, which is against shareholder value and quarterly reports. So there's a tension there. And so I think one is to acknowledge that it's a fundamentally difficult system to operate in. But one way to start is by exhibiting the behavior, or at least showing the behavior, if you're being managed, that is the one that you'd want your children and the next generation to replicate.
So you asked a question, you encouraged us to ask the question of our team members, what can I do today to help you do your best work? And earlier, I want to loop back to something you said earlier about trading on your idiosyncrasies.
Yes.
So I want you to go back, because I think those two things are connected. So
Yeah.
can you hook those together? So
Sure.
I got a team of people, and they're idiosyncratic because they're human beings, right?
Yeah.
They're all different. They're all amazingly talented and have great potential, and they're kind of weird at times, right? And
Yeah.
I know that they say that about me. And even if they were here right now, they would say, yep, he is. So how do we as leaders trade on people's idiosyncrasies? I just love that phrase.
Yeah. I mean, I tell you a little story of working in a university and always getting asked to go for drinks. I was living in London. Every Friday or every Thursday, we're going to the pub. I never went. Then I got a guilt trip, or I felt guilty, and then I showed up just as the bell was ringing, or maybe half an hour. So I had one drink. The story I was telling myself is, I don't want them to see me drunk, or I don't want them to see a side of me that is not professional. I was concerned that I would lose respect, that they would not listen to me, that I would be ineffective because now they know that I like breakdancing.
And it wasn't because you didn't want to go.
No. I felt culturally it was inappropriate. I don't know. My inputs from society were, people like me in this position don't go to the pub and get drunk with people that you manage. And now I think about it now, and that's kind of sad. And then I fast forward to like a Zoom meeting that you've probably been on or that you've even held, and someone's got their cat and the kid opens the door and you see in the background your photograph with your wife. And now we're humanizing work in real time. And I don't even have to ask you these questions. I see where you live. Sometimes I have trees in the background. They're like, oh, where are you? I'm like, I'm in Canada. They go, I'd love to go there. So now it's happening, but we had to wait for the ball to drop. And so I guess one thing to say is there's oversharing, there's being too emotional, there's giving too much information. Keep that to yourself, which is sort of common sense. And then there's like really being protective, like I was, and not wanting to let people into the world that is Jonas or Kevin. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of sad because in many ways we stuff parts of ourselves that don't need to be. And so your uniqueness or your idiosyncrasies can sometimes, especially in advertising and technology and the creative industries, be a currency. Like, I don't know how to use TikTok, but I'll figure it out. And then you do a little video and it goes viral. If you had said, well, you don't really do TikTok, we have someone for that.
Right.
A trick.
Yeah. You know, the interesting thing as you say that is that, you know, a lot of people that have written books like you and I, right? They use words like being transparent and being genuine. And people say, well, I don't want them to see everything. And what you're saying is you don't have to see everything, but you've got to be willing, you know, like there's a line, there's a spot, you don't need to bare our soul about every last thing, but there's far more to be gained for us and for others if we're willing to, you know, maybe go to the pub, using that as a metaphor rather than as, right.
And then, you know, being discerning with exactly that. You know, intuitively, you know that withholding something is going to not create psychological safety and inhibit great work, or by dumping it onto someone is basically saying, deal with this crap and, you know, have a good day. And so in many ways that would be stifling innovation.
Right. So one of the things that is woven throughout your book, and it won't be surprising to anyone, even if you've not read it, if we're talking about being more human at work and making work differently, the idea of finding meaning in our work is a huge piece of the book. And I'd love for you to dive into that a little bit in terms of what does that mean to you? I know that you and I both know that it's possible. Some people might need to hear that is actually possible, but what does that mean to you?
What does meaning mean to me? That's a great question. It's a hot topic. Meaning is subjective. You read anything about it, any literature, you got a difference between happiness, fulfillment, purpose, satisfaction. Meaning is subjective. It's Kevin reflecting onto your past and all of your experiences, assuming you don't have dementia or Alzheimer's, God forbid, and projecting yourself into a future that you have yet to live. And we're here right now, October 8th. So meaning can sort of transcend time, like almost like a Tarantino movie where it's just all, whereas happiness is fleeting. You know, I use the example of a gelato ice cream. You're in a sunny day and, you know, you're happy, but then it's gone, the sun and the ice cream. I didn't have meaning in work because I was either searching for in the wrong place. I wasn't even aware that it was something that you were allowed to get. I just thought you hustled, you know, the Gary Vaynerchuk, go, go, go. Busyness is a badge of honor. Productivity is, you know, you're a ninja. Like, you know, I'm cooking, I'm Instagramming, and I'm writing an article at the same time with my feet. And
I'm Instagramming the cooking while I'm typing over here, right?
So I let go of that story, and I realized, and it's part of I think it's part of my epigenetics and family history of, I love working with people. I love helping people. I love connecting with people. I get energized by conversations like this. If I could get paid to learn, if someone would give me money to continually feed my brain, and I know
they paid you to write the book.
Yeah. And also we got other books that we're going to talk about. I'd be the luckiest man on earth. And so meaning, which often came from the church or the synagogue or the mosque, or from a spiritual practice is now being extracted or searched for or revealed in what we call work, whatever work is. That's just where we're at. So I'm aware of like kind of the irony. However, if I look at the people around me who are having mini existential meltdowns or openings or invitations, it is now that people are saying, is this how I want to spend the next 10, 20, 30 years? And if I am going to retire, to what?
Well, so, as we think about meaning in that way, the collective of the past and translating that to the future, what's your thought about how maybe we will societally, or how individuals will look back on this pandemic, and how will it have impacted people's perspective, do you think?
Yeah. The last time I got asked this question, I said, I don't know, but that's a cop-out. I don't know. Like, I really don't know. And if someone predicts...
It's an unfair question, because it's going to be somewhat different for everybody.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that you can kind of play with the idea, because I think it's something worth us thinking about. I really do.
Yeah. There's only one person that I always think that actually could answer that question, and he lives in Vancouver, and it's the sci-fi writer William Gibson, who coined the term cyberspace. His new book is about a pandemic, just by chance. So assuming we can't, I would say what would be really beautiful is for work to lose its connotation as toil, as drudgery, as somewhere you have to go, a thing you must do, a job that you possess. And we lose all of that, and we look at homeschooling, and we look at emotional labor, and we look at teachers and volunteers and community engagement and all these other forms of work that have really gone undervalued. And then in that way, the idea, and even the idea of universal basic income or some form of safety net, becomes destigmatized, and we sort of distribute quality work, because right now it's really concentrated with the few in terms of the global population, the global working population. And so if more and more people could find an opportunity to feel free in work, or feel joy in work, or be nourished by their work, which is sort of the premise of doing what you love, you're seeing it in places like Kenya, in Scandinavia, in Canada, where they've trialed giving, no questions asked, $1,000, or, the equivalent of $50 a month. And people go and they set up barbershops. They go and they buy motorcycles, start giving taxi lifts. They lend money, and they become a microfinancing kind of thing. So I guess the roundabout way of saying is that it's an opportunity for a complete reset and a reinvention of what work means, and therefore an ability to find your place in it, so that there's even a glimmer of meaning, or hopefully much more opportunity to feel fulfilled.
So you talk about, so I think that's great. And I appreciate you sort of expanding on.
I kind of went like this, but
expanding on, starting with, I don't know, and then giving me 7 minutes. No, I'm just teasing. So in the book, you talk about something that's not your original phrase, but you talk about it in the book. And I think it connects. I thought we'd go here because of what you just said. You write a good bit about the idea of fluid work. And I think that you would say that that's part of what the future of work might look like. Talk about that idea. I know it's not yours originally, but I think you've added a lot to the thought of what it is in the book. So talk about fluid work.
Sure. Well, we should probably credit both the practice of yoga and the Harvard professor, Amy Edmondson, who wrote a book called Teaming. And anyone who's thinking about teams and organizing in a way that's like water instead of stone. So much more adaptive, much more resilient, much more about information can go where it needs to go to be accessed, so that people can make smart and faster decisions. So it just makes good sense to have fluid teams that can form and disband quickly. It makes sense to yourself work in a way of like, after this podcast, it's probably not going to be a great idea to go onto another one immediately. It might be a nice idea to go for a walk or have a cup of tea with your wife. I'm hopefully going to go for a walk, I think. So if you have the fortune or the ability to design your day at an individual level, why not make it somewhat fluid with whatever it is you need to be your best as a parent, as a son, as a colleague, as a leader? At the team level, fluid teams could operate like Hollywood, set up an LLC, run the script, and then have a wrap party. The permanence of a team doesn't need to be about the sense of belonging and camaraderie. It's the job is done. Let's form another team, or let's be on multiple teams at the same time. And then if you do that at the organizational level, it does look like a bunch of mini startups or an ecosystem of enterprises that no longer is like this, General Electric crazy hierarchical thing where you're trying to, like, in a static way, map what the organization looks like. It looks like an organism.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, and when we, I think that I'll say two things about that. You were saying General Electric, and I'm not picking on General Electric. I don't think you are either necessarily.
No.
But the word monolith came to my head.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that we certainly, we have probably both seen small organizations that pretty much look like that. There's just not as many boxes. And we've seen bigger organizations that look way less like that and way more fluid. So if you're sitting here or walking as you're listening to this podcast and saying, well, we can't be fluid because we're big or whatever, that's sort of silliness, right? And even if you're inside of that large organization, you have a lot that you can do as an individual leader in terms of how you work with your team and how you view work and how you help your team view work.
Spot on. Another company that's big that comes to mind would be Procter and Gamble. God knows how many products and things they have in the market and that is in R&D and in development. But when they open up with P&G Connect to say the smartest people in the world probably don't work here. I'm sure some of the smartest people in the world do work there. You then also look at fluidity as you don't have to have people on payroll in order to benefit from Netflix's prize for their algorithm. You can pay them. You dangle but it's not the money, right? It's the problem that's the juice. The people that solve it are just excited about that challenge. And often they're the people who are so far from the field of vision that they bring this beginner's mindset to say, like, what are you guys talking about? Here's how you build a rocket ship. And it's like a school teacher.
Right.
So I do love what you said. And I think the challenge is that the big sort of cruise ship style organizations, that they try to just change a little bit, but that incremental change or just figuring out one intervention has a cascading effect. It's not like we need to all of a sudden be a bunch of micro enterprises. It's okay, we're moving in that direction.
I just am struck as you're saying that. I'm looking across to a bookcase over here in the far reaches. I can't see the book, but I know it's there. To a person who's been on this podcast, Tom Peters, who wrote a book in 1985 that talked about some of these very things.
Oh yeah,
right. And so this is all new, and yet we're still trying to figure it out. And I think we can be okay with that when we realize that we've lived in a machine age and an industrial revolution in terms of way of running businesses as they continue to grow in size, as the world continued to change. It's going to take us a while to figure this out. Yeah. There's very little that you're hearing from Jonas and I that you haven't heard before. You may be hearing it in a new way. It may be enlightening and illuminating it for you in a new way, and that's super important. The point is, we've got to keep moving ourselves in that direction.
I mean, you got to give a head nod to Margaret Mead, Tom Peters, Charles Handy, Peter Drucker. There's Alvin Toffler. They all have been on about this for 70 years. It's insane. And if we look at COVID, and no one could predict it, you could say the future of work arrived overnight, and now it's up to us to find the meaning and the system that's going to set us free and no longer be on an antiquated, outdated machine age system.
Yeah. You used a phrase just a second ago that I hope people heard, like where do people find the juice? I think maybe that would be how I would how I might, the phrase that I might use to define this whole conversation that we've had. It's about finding the juice, right? I love that. So a couple of things before we go. When you're not, you just said that you love to learn, and you learn, if people would pay you to do that, then, that's what you do. But what do you do for fun, Jonas?
Oh, if I could get paid to surf, then I'd be very happy. I like being in water. So when I wasn't writing Shapers, I was with my friend who's the protagonist surfing to replenish. I love reading. I've always enjoyed running, although I've had a love-hate relationship with it sometimes because I don't like running for that long. And I
5 minutes, 12 minutes. How long is too long?
I've done the long runs, and my body's not made that way. So I'd say like somewhere between the 30 minutes to an hour is the butter zone.
Gotcha.
And the other thing is I really do like meeting new people. Like I know that sounds cliche, but when I meet someone new with a new worldview, I just go, wow, like, first of all, like we're 99.9% the same, but then all of a sudden there's one chromosome and you've got those eyes, you got blue eyes, I've got hazel. But also your whole experience is like everyone has something to share. So when I meet someone new and I'm like, what's your story? It's like, poof. So I do spend quite a lot of time meeting new people, either just by chance or by deliberately, which is nourishing.
Excellent. So you mentioned reading, and the only question you knew I was going to ask you is this next one. So what are you reading? And I know you're prepared. You have visual aids.
So this one was interesting as I moved from writing to marketing. So highly recommend, very easy read. Ryan Holiday's a fantastic writer. This one is the second book, and there's a lot of inspiration from Shapers, from Utopia for Realists, but this is called Humankind, and its fundamental thesis is we got it wrong. Humankind is good. We're not evil. And then this one is
amen. By the way, amen to that. By the way,
this one you can't put down. My brother came over and there's water all over it, but that's great because it gives it some legs. It's a local hero from Vancouver, and it's a fiction book, and it's 100% unpolitically correct. Worst person ever. Can't recommend it enough, especially if you work in the film and or casting world. You will love it.
Worst person ever. Which you are not, sir. By the way.
No,
but now the question you wanted me to ask from the beginning, like, okay, where do we learn more about you? Where do we get the book? Tell people. I'll hold it up again. Jonas Altman, the book is Shapers. How can people learn more about you and all that?
If you're an Instagram generation, you go to @shapers.life. If you like the website, you go to www.shapers.life. And if you want to jam with me or have a conversation with me, you can go to jonasaltman.com.
jonasaltman.com. And I can tell you this, everybody. I don't know what it really is, but I know that about the time the podcast comes out in a couple of months, he's going to be releasing or getting ready to release a brand new chance to go deeper and learn more with him. So if you're hearing this on the podcast, we'll do our best to get that link into all of the show notes, but just check out him, follow him, talk to him, and he'll tell you all about that at that point. It's just a little early to do that in October, but it won't be in December. So I hope you'll do that. Jonas, thanks so much for being here. It was so much a pleasure to have you. Now I have a question for everybody else. No more questions for Jonas, just one for you. What are you going to do? Now what? What are you going to take from this? What action are you going to take if all you do is find, well, these guys were kind of fun. It was kind of interesting. They're kind of different, but they seem to enjoy each other's company, learned a little bit, but so what? What are you going to do? What action are you going to take as a result of being here? That's what really matters. That's what will make a difference. And quite honestly, that's why we both did this, is so that you would be able to take some idea from this and apply it to your work, to the work of your team, to your life's work. And so we both appreciate you being here. I'm speaking for both of us, like I know. Let me close by just telling all of you that we do this every week, and you really ought to be back. And if you want to join us live so you can get into some of this earlier, then you really should be joining us on either the Facebook group or the LinkedIn group, because you can watch us live. So remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn, remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook. Jonas, thanks for being here.
Be there. Thanks, Kevin. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Hey, we'll be back again next week with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We'll see you all then.